In Pittsburgh's East End, there's a steel bridge 447 feet long, 4 lanes wide, held up by angled steel supports at each pier. 14,000 vehicles crossed it every single day. It's called the Fern Hollow Bridge, and at 6:37 in the morning, in the dark, in the snow, it simply stopped existing. Just moments earlier, 4 cars and a city transit bus had been driving across it like any other morning. Then the bridge gave way beneath them, all at once, and everything on it, cars, bus, and roadway, was suddenly falling. The bridge didn't crack in half and topple. It folded straight down, like someone had cut the strings on a puppet and dropped 100 feet into the trees below. Here's the part that sounds made up, but isn't. That same morning, a few miles away, the President of the United States was already on a plane to Pittsburgh to give a speech about fixing America's crumbling bridges. Keep that detail in your pocket. It's going to come back. And when it does, it's going to feel less like a coincidence and more like a deadline the bridge simply couldn't make. This is a story about 2 clocks running at the same time without either one knowing about the other. One clock had been ticking for 13 years, counted in rust, in inspection reports, in a word that kept showing up on paperwork nobody acted on: poor. The other clock had been ticking for a few months, counted in press releases and funding announcements, building toward a single triumphant photo opportunity. Nobody planned for those 2 clocks to hit 0 on the same morning. But they did. And when they did, 9 people were sent tumbling into a ravine, and a quiet Pittsburgh neighborhood became the most famous case study in American infrastructure in a generation. To understand how a bridge can be rated poor for over a decade and still be carrying 14,000 cars a day right up until it collapses, you have to go back to the bridge's original claim to fame. Because this bridge wasn't neglected because it was ordinary. It was neglected, in part, because it was supposed to be special. The Fern Hollow Bridge went up in 1973, replacing an older, aging span that had carried traffic over the same wooded ravine since the early 1900s. Engineers at the time were proud of what they built. The new bridge used a K-frame design, 2 angled steel legs on each pier instead of the usual straight columns, which let the whole structure sit lower and lighter over the park than a conventional bridge would. It looked less like a slab of highway dropped onto the landscape and more like it grew there. The design was good enough to land on the cover of a national trade magazine, celebrating the best bridges built that year. But the real innovation wasn't the shape. It was the metal. The Fern Hollow Bridge was built almost entirely from a material called weathering steel, sometimes known by its old trademarked name, Core 10. And weathering steel is a genuinely clever idea. Ordinary steel rusts and just keeps rusting, flaking away, layer after layer, until there's nothing left. Weathering steel is engineered to do something different. When it's exposed to rain and dry air in a regular back-and-forth cycle, it forms a tight, dense layer of rust on its outer surface, a patina that actually seals the metal underneath and stops the corrosion from going any deeper. Think of it like a scab. The first injury heals itself and then protects the tissue underneath from getting hurt again. That's the whole promise of weathering steel. No paint, no maintenance, just a material that heals its own skin. It's why the bridge never needed a paint crew. It's also, as it turns out, exactly what makes this story possible. Hold on to that. We'll come back to what happens when a self-healing material is never given the chance to heal. There's a small, almost ironic detail buried in here too. Weathering steel was developed commercially in the 1930s by U.S. Steel, right there in Pittsburgh. The material that would eventually help bring down one of the city's own bridges was, in a sense, a Pittsburgh invention coming home. For its first 3 decades, the bridge did exactly what it was built to do. It carried Forbes Avenue between 3 East End neighborhoods, Point Breeze, Regent Square, and Squirrel Hill, invisibly and reliably, the kind of infrastructure nobody thinks about until it's gone. Commuters crossed it without a second thought, morning after morning, year after year. It became one small piece of a city with an almost absurd number of bridges. Pittsburgh, wedged between 3 rivers and cut through with ravines like this one, has more bridges than any city in the world. Somewhere around 450 of them, more than Venice. But a bridge that heals itself only stays healthy as long as somebody lets it. That's the catch nobody was thinking about while the bridge quietly did its job for 30 years. And that number matters, because it's the second clock in this story, the one nobody was watching as closely as they should have been. In 2011, inspectors looked at the Fern Hollow Bridge and rated it poor, not failing, not emergency, poor, a specific engineering category that means significant deterioration, but not yet a closure order. The kind of rating that's supposed to trigger a repair plan, not a shutdown. The bridge kept carrying traffic. It helps to know what that word, poor, actually means on paper, because it isn't the bottom of the scale. Federal bridge inspectors grade structures from excellent down through good, fair, and finally poor, the lowest category that still allows a bridge to stay open to normal traffic. Below poor, there's only one option left: closure. So poor isn't a warning that something might go wrong someday. It's the last rung on the ladder before the ladder runs out. A bridge doesn't sit in that category for over a decade by accident. It sits there because, year after year, somebody quietly decides it can wait one more budget cycle. In 2013, inspectors found holes in the bridge's steel legs, 11 inches across, punched straight through the web of the metal by corrosion, with total section loss on several of the internal stiffeners holding those legs rigid. Still poor, still open. In 2017, inspectors went further, recommending a full overhaul of the bridge because of, in their words, general structural deterioration and inadequate strength. They put a number on the fix: $1.5 million. That project was never funded. By September 2021, 4 months before the collapse, the most recent inspection on file described 12 by 12-inch holes straight through the bridge's steel legs, 5 separate stiffeners on those legs, with total section loss, meaning they were no longer doing anything structurally at all, and advanced corrosion running through the whole system. That report still only recommended a repair within 24 months, not a closure. This is the part of the story that isn't really about metal at all. It's about the gap between what an inspector writes down and what a city actually does about it. Pittsburgh had over 100 bridges rated poor at the same time as Fern Hollow, and officials later said, almost defensively, that other bridges in the county were considered to be in worse shape. There simply wasn't enough money to fix them all, so a triage system quietly decided which crumbling bridge got attention first. And Fern Hollow kept losing that competition, year after year, report after report. Somewhere in that decade, a Pittsburgh resident posted a photo online of one of the bridge's massive X-shaped support beams, rusted through completely. You could see straight through solid steel to daylight on the other side. A city councilman said the beam and its cables got replaced. He wasn't sure if anything else was ever done. So, here is where the two failures start to overlap: the failure of the metal and the failure of the paperwork. And to understand how they combined into a collapse, you need to go back to that scab analogy, because this is where it gets genuinely strange. Weathering steel only builds its protective patina under the right conditions. It needs to get wet, and then it needs to dry out completely, over and over, in a clean cycle. That alternation, wet then dry, is what forces the rust to knit itself into that tight protective skin, instead of flaking apart. But if the steel stays wet constantly, if water pools against it and never fully evaporates, the chemistry changes entirely. Instead of a hard protective layer, you get loose, flaky, expanding rust, the ordinary destructive kind, chewing deeper into the metal with no floor to stop it. The Fern Hollow Bridge had drains built into its deck, specifically to keep this from happening. Small outlets designed to carry rainwater and snowmelt away from the steel legs below. Those drains clogged. Leaves, grit, road salt, and debris built up in them for years, and instead of running off, water ran straight down the bridge's angled steel legs and pooled at the base, where it sat, permanently wet, permanently in contact with metal that was built to expect dry spells it was never getting. Investigators later found this exact condition, clogged drains, standing water, and corrosion, on every single one of the bridge's 4 legs. A material engineered to protect itself was being drowned in the one condition it couldn't survive, and the city's own drainage system was doing the drowning. There's something almost unbearably quiet about that as a cause of disaster. No dramatic flood, no storm, no earthquake, just a few feet of clogged pipe ignored for years, slowly rewriting the chemistry of a bridge's own skeleton. By the winter of 2022, one leg had taken the worst of it. The southwest leg of the bridge, the one investigators would later trace the entire failure back to, had a critical horizontal piece inside it called a transverse tie plate, a component with a job that sounds boring until you understand it. That plate was what kept the 2 angled steel legs of that support locked rigidly together, holding the whole frame in its shape under load. Years of trapped water had eaten that plate down to almost nothing. On the night of January 27th into the 28th, 2022, it was snowing in Pittsburgh. Schools were on a 2-hour delay, which meant Forbes Avenue was quieter than usual that early. At 6:37 in the morning, the corroded tie plate inside that southwest leg finally gave out completely. And once one leg of a rigid K-frame structure loses its shape, the rest of the frame has nothing left to distribute the load to. The failure moved through the bridge almost instantly. 4 cars and a Port Authority transit bus were on the span when it went. All of it fell nearly 100 feet into the ravine below, onto the snow-covered walking trails of Frick Park. Investigators would later say that the early hour and the snow delay, the very thing that made the morning feel like an inconvenience, were almost certainly what kept this from being a mass casualty event. 9 people were hurt. Nobody died. What was left behind looked like a war photo. A transit bus sat nose down in the wreckage, tilted at an angle no bus is supposed to sit at, its rear wheels still up near where the roadway used to be. Snapped steel and broken concrete lay scattered through the ravine's trees. Firefighters rappelled almost 150 feet down into the gorge on ropes to reach the stranded vehicles, while other rescuers formed a human chain across the broken slabs of roadway to pull survivors up and out, hand to hand, through falling snow. It took hours to get everyone off the wreckage safely. By the time the last person was out, the story had already stopped being a local traffic accident. National news crews were setting up cameras at the edge of the crater before noon, and a few miles away, completely unaware, the president's motorcade was already inbound to Pittsburgh. Here's the sequence, laid out plainly, because it really is this close. The president had a trip to Pittsburgh scheduled for that exact Friday, planned well in advance, built around a speech promoting his $1.2 trillion infrastructure law and its investment in repairing America's aging bridges. The bridge collapsed at 6:37 that morning. The president's plane landed later that day, already committed to a city that now had a fresh, televised bridge collapse sitting a few miles from his podium. Instead of simply giving his prepared remarks, the president's motorcade detoured to the collapse site itself. He stood at the edge of the same crater the bridge had fallen into hours earlier, looked down at a stranded transit bus still hanging in the wreckage, and told the cameras that Pittsburgh had more bridges than any city in the world, and that his administration was going to, in his words, fix them all. To be precise about what funding means here, that January visit was built around a law that had already passed months earlier, not a new check being signed that morning. The actual dollars for Fern Hollow itself, roughly $25 million in fast-tracked federal money to rebuild this specific bridge, weren't announced until October, when the president came back to Pittsburgh a second time. But the sequence still holds. The bridge that all of that funding existed to protect was already lying in a ravine before the president ever spoke a single word about it. It's one of those moments where reality does something fiction would get criticized for being too obvious about. A president flying in to promote a plan to save America's crumbling bridges, arriving to find one of the exact bridges his plan was supposed to save already lying in a ravine. But calling it a coincidence undersells what actually happened, because the timing wasn't really an accident of scheduling. It was two separate systems finally intersecting. One system was physical. 13 years of documented, ignored decay, finally running out of steel to hold itself together. The other system was political. A funding announcement built on the premise that American bridges were dangerously overdue for exactly this kind of intervention. The bridge didn't collapse because the president was arriving. But the reason the president was arriving and the reason the bridge collapsed were, underneath it all, the exact same reason. A national backlog of deferred maintenance that had been quietly piling up for decades, waiting for either a check or a catastrophe to finally show up first. On this one morning, in this one city, they showed up on the same day. It took the National Transportation Safety Board 2 years and more than 5,000 pages of documents to fully explain what happened. And when their final report landed in February 2024, it didn't blame an act of God, and it didn't blame the design. One board member said it flatly in the hearing, "This bridge didn't collapse just by an act of God. It collapsed because of a lack of maintenance and repair." The investigation found that Pittsburgh had received repeated, documented maintenance recommendations for this bridge going back to 2005 and simply failed to act on them year after year, report after report. It found that the load rating posted on the bridge, the number that told drivers how much weight it could legally carry, had been calculated using outdated assumptions and was wildly wrong. Investigators recalculated it correctly and found the true safe capacity wasn't 26 tons. It was closer to 3, a number so low that an accurate calculation would have forced the bridge closed on the spot years before it actually fell. And it found that the inspectors themselves, the ones tasked with catching exactly this kind of decay, had made their own errors, missing critical fracture points, and failing to properly document the very corrosion that was quietly dissolving the bridge's skeleton from the inside. The report's final conclusion was almost uncomfortably plain. If any one of several different people City officials, state overseers, or the inspectors themselves had simply done their job correctly at any point over more than a decade, this bridge would have been closed long before it had the chance to fall. What happened next moved at a speed almost nobody in American infrastructure ever sees. Normally, replacing a major urban bridge takes somewhere between 2 and 5 years, sometimes longer, tangled in design reviews, environmental studies, and funding fights. Fern Hollow reopened to traffic in under 11 months. Crews worked through a Pittsburgh winter to pour new concrete foundations, backed by that fast-tracked federal money moving through the system faster than almost any comparable project in the country. When the president came back that October, less than 3 weeks before the midterm elections, to stand beside a construction crane at the same site, he called the accelerated rebuild proof of what government can do when it works. By December 2022, the new bridge was open, its deck and support structure now built from concrete instead of unprotected weathering steel, engineered from scratch to shed water instead of trap it. The story didn't end with the ribbon cutting, though, because the collapse had exposed something much bigger than one bridge in one Pittsburgh park. In the months after, the NTSB urged transportation officials across the entire country to go back and re-examine more than 10,000 other bridges built with the same kind of uncoated weathering steel construction, the same self-healing material that only works if somebody keeps the drains clear. Pennsylvania, it turned out, had more structurally deficient bridges than any other state in the country, and Allegheny County, Pittsburgh's own county, had more of them than anywhere else in Pennsylvania. Fern Hollow wasn't an outlier. It was simply the one that happened to fall first, on the one morning a president happened to be watching. And that's really the uncomfortable math sitting underneath this whole story. Pittsburgh alone had roughly 450 bridges to maintain on a budget that could never touch all of them in any given year. Multiply that single city by every county, every state, every overworked department of transportation in the country, making the exact same impossible triage decision, and you start to understand why a bridge can sit rated poor in public records for 13 years without anyone treating it like an emergency. It wasn't that nobody cared. It was that everybody was choosing between several poor bridges with the same limited pot of money, and Fern Hollow kept losing that competition. The infrastructure law the president had flown in to promote wasn't just good timing for a photo. It existed precisely because there were thousands of quiet clocks like this one running out across the country, and the money to stop them had been arriving too slowly for years. So what do you actually blame here? Not the steel. The NTSB was explicit about that. Weathering steel wasn't cited as a design flaw, and the material itself has protected thousands of bridges for decades when it's allowed to do what it's built to do. Not the K-frame design either, the same shape still considered elegant and efficient today. What failed here wasn't the engineering of 1973, it was every decision made after it. A drain nobody cleared. A repair estimate nobody funded. A load rating nobody recalculated. 13 years of a single word, poor, typed into a report and filed away without ever becoming an action. The bridge didn't fall because nobody knew. It fell because knowing, on its own, was never enough. That's the part of this story that should genuinely unsettle you, more than the collapse itself. Fern Hollow wasn't a mystery. It wasn't hidden. It was rated poor in public documents for over a decade, photographed by ordinary residents who could see daylight through its rusted beams, flagged by inspectors who used the correct word every single year. The system worked exactly as designed, right up until the moment the paperwork simply wasn't enough to stop physics from finishing the sentence the reports had been writing since 2011. And somewhere in Washington, at the exact same hour that sentence finished, a plane full of officials was already in the air, on its way to tell the country that help finally was on the way. It just arrived a few hours too late for the one bridge it should have reached first.